going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. After grinding Marvel Rivals since its release, I have a good, strong feeling on where the Season 0 meta is, and having watched a bunch of content from other content creators and what's going on at the top levels of play, I think I have a good way to explain, as I usually do with Overwatch, what the average player should expect when assessing the character cast of the game. If you're new to our channel, I do plan on making Marvel Rivals content alongside Overwatch, since they both are interesting hero shooters that I think share a lot of the same audience. And my approach to teaching the game is to get the most out of your gameplay as an average player, translating what the top players are doing as opposed to universally only discussing their meta, which is often distinctly very different, and it's definitely different in this game. And quick disclaimer, while I am not a top Overwatch player myself, I've never competed as a pro or coached there, I have also poured over thousands of hours of VOD reviews, made guides, primarily I would say through Overwatch 1, and I was an even higher ranked player in Overwatch 1 with 6v6 and team comp mechanics and really understanding the strategy of the game more than just being a good player myself. But even then, with Overwatch 2, I'm around a top 1% player, whereas a lot of content creators are top 0.1 or 0.001% players and play an entirely separate game to the rest of us. All right, so that's my philosophy to making content and guides and my instruction through the game. I think, as an example, a character that is going to be very important to look at whenever you see any tier list going out right now about Marvel Rivals is how good do we think Iron Fist is? Well, he's actually got a passive buff. Marvel Rivals does this nonsense mobile game mechanic where he just gets a flat 15% buff because, well, it's like a mobile game, and he's the season chosen one, apparently, to get easy value. The problem I have with Iron Fist, and you'll see from my review video of Marvel Rivals, is that he's really obvious in what he does, and he doesn't have the extreme mobility and skill ceiling of some other heroes. So while he is going to get free kills and be very durable and punishing, he's a bit of a noob trap character. So you're going to expect him to do well at the start, but as soon as players start to realize the S tier characters of the game, he doesn't look as threatening. Now, interestingly enough, I will also be copying the top tier meta that considers Mantis as well as Luna Snow to be top tier picks. The reason for this is they're very flexible supports with disable abilities that can protect them. They offer a lot of stats, a lot of plays, good defensive ults. All that matters for team play as well, but most importantly for solo queue play, this is the supports that you'll be able to pick in order to control your destiny. So when these solo flankers come in on you, like Iron Fist or really any diver, you've got a pretty easy to land disable that takes them out. Luna Snow has more mobility in order to get away. Mantis has more multitasking and just overall stats. But either way, if you are the more skill you put into either of these picks, the better you're going to get out of them. But most importantly to me, as opposed to Ana Sleep Dart, which maybe is somewhat difficult to land for the average player, the hitboxes on especially Mantis's sleep is really big. It's just like an AoE smoke bomb almost. And the ice nade from the alternate fire of Luna Snow, I also don't think is too difficult to land, maybe closer to the difficulty of Sleep Dart, but either way, these are S tier picks. So the idea of sending a squishy into the backline to 1v1 a support over and over again, you stop that from happening right away by just picking these characters. So as long as you can exploit that, Iron Fist is going to be annoying and up tier, but otherwise I'm going to say he's like kind of like the Bastion of this game, basically, whereas at the launch of Overwatch 1, Bastion was a character that would catch you out, but as soon as you understood the technology of how to interact with him, not that hard of a pick to deal with. Next, I want to populate the tier list based on other melee damage dealers. An interesting one is Wolverine, who I think is kind of misunderstood what he will be good for. Consider him like the Reaper tank buster of this game. He actually surprisingly does percentage-based damage, which means if you pocket him while he's fighting a tank, then he's going to be able to shred them. The only problem is tanks aren't necessarily deemed that strong, but I think a lot of average players are worried about the GOATS comp from Overwatch, multi-tank, multi-support, starting to take over. And the two heroes that I want you to look out for if you are playing against multiple tanks is either Wolverine or Iron Man, who I do put lower out the tier list basically because they don't have the same maneuverability and outplay potential. Iron Man, unlike his Pharah counterpart in Overwatch, is very slow, so a lot of things can just go up and get him in the air anyway. And while they do have good damage, dealing damage isn't like the best thing in this game. Often it's either your maneuverability or your options or your sustain, just more damage. It's not like you're going to insta-kill anything in this game regardless. So having a bit more damage than something else, it's not going to matter more than your ability to cooldown exchange over time. And because Iron Man is too slow and Wolverine's a bit obvious and there's other heroes that are just a bit better, they are at the bottom of the tier list, but keep in mind they are counter picks. If you're going up against multi-tank, look to these heroes to shine. More melee heroes now. We're going to populate all these into the A tier, which I think are based on your skill. All right. I constantly see these all over the map where people think Spider-Man's really weak or Magic's much better or Black Panther up and down. I see a lot of controversial takes on these heroes. And I think importantly, each of their unique movement skill sets and plays are so individualized. You just got to master one and they're going to go up and down based on your performance. Black Panther, for example, I think might have the highest peak potential, seeing as he does extra damage when he's at chip health. And well, that has certainly caught me out trying to play one of these supports where I think I can lock him down. I'm starting to win the duel, but then he automatically wins it by overpowering me with his crazy damage. So I think he's pretty good. But once in a while, I do see a Spider-Man take over the lobby. It kind of depends. Either way, whether it's the insane mobility of Spider-Man or the burst potential of Black Panther, these characters can do a lot more damage and are less obvious than Iron Fist or Wolverine, who you should be able to eventually learn how to disable and not allow to get away with shenanigery in your backline. I should have also included Psylocke in that flanker quattro right there. The flankers in the game, I think, are going to lessen in their power over time as players start to realize how much value you can have just kind of sustaining the team comp and looking after one another and picking out the squishy in the middle of the dive and the aggro. You really can single them out quite easily in the middle of the fight. And I'll show you some picks that are able to do that. Right now, there's a lot of chaos, so just jumping out onto the backline when your team's not looking. Once people start to realize just to sustain rather than push, like the more you push, the more the flanks can come in on your backline. But if you're just looking for the flanks, and I think that's something that's going to adapt over time, these heroes start to look not as good as they're performing early on in the game. What I think more likely is going to happen over time is the range damage characters are going to be getting a premium because it's a third-person shooter game after all. You can all have awareness. Like, imagine if your team kind of just spreads out, takes cover, you shouldn't be so surprised if something comes from the sky. So range damage characters, I think, are even better. A super underrated one is Punisher, who, especially in multi-DPS setups, if you think about it, a lot of the DPS characters aren't so self-sustainable. They don't heal themselves. If a tank gets on them, they're kind of screwed. The Punisher has some durability in his turret. It blocks damage while he's in it. So as an extra DPS pressure, instead of, let's say, a tank pick, that's some sustain that you otherwise wouldn't have. It's not quite the same thing as like Soldier 76 in Overwatch healing himself, but kind of the same. Also, his shotgun's pretty good at melting down some of the larger targets in the game. He just has a lot of options and his mobility is insane. Like, low-key, his mobility is almost as good as some of the flankers if you start to learn how to use the grapple. He doesn't get picked so often, I think because he's like the vanilla character of the game, but he's very, very good in my opinion and is going to be one of those ranked characters that you can flex to actually have a lot of individual impact with your mechanics. But still, there's other picks that I put above him. Hela has a higher skill ceiling, though I think Punisher's easier to play, so keep that in mind depending on your skill level. Squirrel Girl, I'm going to put under each of them, but as a super underrated pick, I think a lot of tier lists are going to put Squirrel Girl much lower, but especially with the team-up ability with Spider-Man, you're going to get multi-CC, okay? So there's a lot of comps that kind of just run at you, or characters like Iron Fist jumping in your backline. Hold your backline, have the mobility to get away, and then reset on your mobility. That's nuts. Squirrel Girl's mobility is insane and has CC stacking just for herself. Doesn't even need any help. So your team certainly can follow up on a target that's immobilized. Squirrel Girl can do that. It takes some mastery to understand the nuts projectile to maximize that damage, but even then, it's like a 3-shot kill, which is pretty darn good. Not as good, though, as Hawkeye, who's way up at the top of A tier. This is a pick I don't see picked very often, but definitely a character you should master right now, as it's one of the better damage dealers in general. At higher tiers of play, Hela is more consistent, but if your aim is kind of average, then Hawkeye's probably better because there's a little bit more luck involved, but big bursts of damage from him, pretty insane. Namor, I don't really see do too much. Scarlet Witch, I also think, is overrated. The ultimate is super oppressive when you're not ready for it, but again, another noob pub stomper style ultimate that once we learn how to save your defensive cooldowns in order to get away from it or block it, it's not going to be getting the multi-kills that I see it getting often, but it has been catching me out, I will admit. And I think it's something that, like a Diva Bomb in Overwatch, we'll start to learn is super obvious. Also, mainly just because you can target her when you hear it. So when you hear her ult, everyone needs to turn and shoot her because she's jumping into the middle of everybody and you're just not aware of it, or there's not enough focus fire fast enough, and then it kills everybody. But that's not going to be reliable as the game continues. Moon Knight is kind of BS. Like, there's just no way that the bouncing the little blade around into a room, multi-killing everybody, that's not gonna stay in the game, right? Like, well, I know we're not trying to balance this game, but damn, is that an OP ability. If that remains, then maybe Moon Knight goes higher, because that's kind of nuts. I've seen him pull off some outrageous things, enough for me to keep him in A tier for sure. Super consistent. When there's abilities like that, you start to look at these DPS at the lower end of the tier list and like, well, what the heck are they ever going to do that's going to compete with that? Moon Knight, very good. Winter Soldier's going to land right above Punisher, who's a little bit easier to play, but the skill shots are definitely rewarding. You can kind of mix these up. Maybe he's better than Hela, I don't know, but these range damage dealers, really, really important. You start to look at the top tier of the game, a lot of these can play their own angles and are adaptable to what your team's doing, either because they just have mobility or such high upside. These top tier picks, whether from the support or damage so far, kind of tell the story of what matters, in my opinion, into Marvel Rivals, where there's a lot of chaos going on in the team fight. You want to be able to reposition and just contribute consistently. The supports have a lot of buttons to do that, and a lot of these other picks either are swooping in from the side in order to maybe combo kill something, or just getting lots of value from their off angle, and more importantly, don't need any help to play that position. They can reposition themselves to get to safety. Maybe Squirrel Girl stands out as the gimmickiest one of all of these, but when you consider how much I value mobility to reposition, like your teammate feeds, reposition. You can keep doing that forever, and just soft reset is very, very powerful in this game. Don't overextend. You don't need to be the one to die. Let your team be the fodder and you farm up ult. Don't be the one making the mistake in a 6v6 style game. I'm going to put Star-Lord and Storm down here at the bottom. The skill expression of Star-Lord keeps him in B tier for me. He's probably above Scarlet Witch, but Storm is super slow, and honestly, I might put her as worse. Like, in team play, having an aura to help your team seems good, but the percentage doesn't seem that impactful. Like, I don't really notice a change in time to kill, and it's not like the speed boost is Lucio-esque, where all of a sudden now you're zipping across the map. I don't know. Storm seems just straight up bad to me. And yes, has higher upside than Iron Man if you have teamwork. Iron Man can straight up bombard from the sky and burst damage kill more reliably. Storm has an amazing ult though. I do think it's better than Iron Man's because you can straight up run through the enemy team and blow them all up. It's just that a lot of ults are really good. So you shouldn't really pick a character just for their ults, because anybody's ult with a bit of finesse is going to get some value out of it. So you don't really need to select a character who only has that strength, as all of them make the world go boom when they press ultimate. Black Widow, we're going to put in B tier as well. I have seen some players dominate with her, but with dive and flanking and mobility being as strong as it is, it's just not necessarily as good of an upside, considering there's other ranged options that are going to give you comparable amounts of damage or more, as well as just more options overall. So Black Widow kind of in the middle of the pack, but if you protect her, well, sure, maybe she's going to lay down some fire. If you're good at that skill set, maybe consider her. We have a few more supports and tanks to populate into the tier list here. Cloak and Dagger is a character that the more you master and the better your team is, since there's immortalities and big timing. Like, the better you and your team work around that, I think has a higher upside, but if you're constantly regrouping and expecting your teammates to be making mistakes and you need to like reposition as Luna Snow, that is a bit better for me in most tiers of play, but certainly worth the value of investing into. Supports aren't really bad in this game. They're pretty decent. I just think some of them feel kind of gimmicky. Like I'm going to put Loki and Adam right here in the middle of B tier just because like good stats, decent ults, do some funny things, but they're just not as insane as some of the top tier supports right now. And that could change over time. Jeff is like a fan favorite, it looks like, who does damage. So I'll put them slightly above these two, but I just don't think you need these stats. Like any of them, if you look at, wow, that's a lot of healing stats, or that's a cool thing they can do, the question is, do you disable a flanker? Because that's going to be happening all the time, right? The enemy flanks are going to be coming in, and while yes, Jeff can run away, if I had to choose between going after a skilled Mantis or Luna Snow who can sleep me, or a Jeff who's going to go underground, I would rather go against the Jeff because I feel like I can actually corral Jeff, even though his stats are pretty good. Maybe I'll put him up one more tier. I don't know. Now let's get on to the tanks. Importantly, I want to say that there's some that kind of require team up mechanics in order to be good. Namely, I'm going to say Thor and Captain America in my experience. I've heard, strangely, like big boom and bust opinions on a lot of these tanks, so I'm just going to go on my gut and how I feel about them. I'm going to say Thor and Captain America are mid-tier. Supposedly, if you really get Thor going, because he has a lot of self-regen possibility, if your engagement skill is good, maybe he pops up to higher tiers. But I'm just going to say these two in combination land here in the middle of the pack for me, because Captain America is not very good without Thor, and even with him, I don't think he's insane. The problem is Captain America is super brawly and durable. That's one of his best attributes. He's going to keep going in and out of the fight and has a lot of uptime in terms of draining resources from the enemy. The problem is forcing cooldowns and making picks on his own isn't really his strength. There's a lot of duels that he's just going to watch fly away. Like, for example, if I get onto a Jeff as Captain America, I don't think I can kill him. Whereas Venom has the mobility options to go in and in and again and again and again to eventually find that dive that's going to deal damage. Venom's getting some flack in the community because he's a one-star character, and a lot of people say things about him like, wow, he's like the easiest tank to play and you don't really have to have a brain. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I play Magneto as well, and I don't think my brain expands when I play Magneto, but I'll put him up in A tier as well. These are my two tanks that I play the most. Venom has a major benefit where his attack can headshot, which matters because a lot of these melee characters, you'd think you're going to get on to a target. Well, they have mobility, and the melees oddly are a little bit difficult to land because you're swinging like this and you're slow, they're slow. So getting on them is difficult. So Venom has the opportunity of having the best mobility in class. Then he slams down an enemy in a big AoE. Then he latches onto you with another AoE. All of that does damage. Then he has a medium range attack that can headshot. All of these things make him, I think, one of the most effective damage dealers, at least in terms of mobility and flushing out and taking kills and going and getting map, right? It's like there's a sniper in the nest, Venom's just on it, you know? And you can sick Venom onto a lot of positions and expect to at least harass them and pull resources out, if not just get the kill outright yourself. So I think Venom's very good. I realize we did forget a support. I don't think Rocket Raccoon's very good either. He's got deployables. It's a good time to talk about deployables in general with Penny Parker, okay? I've really changed my opinion on Penny Parker a few times, trying to decide, do I think she's useless? Do I think she's great? I think I'm going to put her at the top of B tier, okay? Way up here. Here's the reason why. Penny Parker is going to be good against everything I just said about with Venom, and while I think there's a higher skill ceiling with her, in fact, because if you move her around and really play tactical and master her kits, I think her stats are pretty good, actually, like better than some of the other picks. And so right now, she kind of functions like Symmetra or Torbjorn, Symmetra especially, because there's some maps on Overwatch where Sim sort of auto wins the point, right? Like you put her things on the point, on the objective, you're going to get the objective first, and the way the enemy has to interact with it is by thinning out your defenses first before they engage in. Whereas if they just jump into the traps against Penny Parker, they'll explode. And all of a sudden, she's laughing all the way to the bank. Like, you have to poke her out slowly and play a slow game. And sometimes you don't really have the time to do that, especially when you think about a lot of these high octane dive heroes or just your team not really being disciplined in general. Somebody's going to over aggress, play too fast into Penny Parker's hands. And I think that makes her a pub stomper for sure. So I'd almost want to put her here. I haven't necessarily seen it look impressive, but I think the stats are better than what my bias is trying to tell me, to like the logic part of my brain. This happens a lot with like certain characters where a high ranked player might use their big brain to be like, well, if you outplay this, it's not going to do anything. But in reality, like, well, how often do people execute well enough to not get outplayed by something she does? And she does have tools in order to engage as well. The more I've learned about the kit, the more optimistic I am. And especially when you start to think about, well, is there an Iron Fist destroying your team? Is there one of these flanker heroes getting onto your back line? Is there a Venom that is super aggressive? I hate playing against Penny Parker as Venom, okay? Because he doesn't really have the tools to poke out all of her traps. So to me, that's a hard counter. So I'm putting her up into A tier, guys. Like, I think Penny Parker has potential, especially in the average tier of play, until people still really start to realize how to outplay it. So if you get your strategy ahead of that, then Penny Parker is going to stabilize the team and really slow the game down, similar to the way that a Symmetra or Torbjorn might. Hulk, I'm going to put in B tier as well. I think he has the mechanics for you to pop off with teamwork, but he's kind of similar to Captain America, where it's a lot of punching around, but not a lot of securing kills easily on your own, whereas I think these other tanks above them can do. Like, you don't necessarily need teammates constantly, and you've got enough damage to deal significant impact on your own. I didn't talk too much about Magneto, just kind of placing him here, but for me, he's the best frontliner tank, but I also think these other tanks are pretty close around with him as well in the A tier. Like, you can kind of swap these up. Magneto's the one I like the best, but otherwise, if you understand how to cycle abilities on the front line, they've got different variations of this. Like, Groot has certain walls that he's going to encapsulate the enemy front line into, and he's got probably the best damage out of all of them from what I can tell with the range damage. Magneto, I think, is pretty consistent. He has a pushback ability and then has like a bubble for either him or his team, then a shield and a good amount of damage. Strange has a much bigger shield, which I actually think is kind of unnecessary, because it's not like Overwatch where there's a sniper angle, and if you aren't protecting the big old sniper angle, you're instantly dead and your teammate's gone. You kind of don't need that big of a shield, in my opinion. Like, your team's often not using it, so the size of the shield, it ain't the size of the shield. It's how you use it, ladies and gentlemen. And so for my money, I think Magneto's shield is just fine. And even sometimes Captain America's tiny shield does the job if you're jamming them up in a choke, right? So maybe there's some maps where Doctor Strange's shield size really matters. I haven't actually seen him do that well. I'm adjusting my opinion a little bit based on what I've heard the top tier players play, as I think some of these others have been more popular in my games. I have belief in this pick. In my experience, I have to put him a little bit lower on A tier. I don't have really a reason to put him any lower than this, because I do think he's better than some of these other tanks that I have below him. But that's the entire tier list, guys. Marvel Rivals, pretty fun game. I do think these supports are the ones you're going to want to look to understand first, because they just say no to a lot of the most obnoxious, easy carry picks that you might otherwise be afraid of. Like, if you're struggling to whether it's keep yourself alive as a support, or you see a teammate going down and you're on support, just start playing some of these disables. I got some honorable mentions here in my list that I think a lot of players are sleeping on. Punisher, Squirrel Girl for sure. And I think in a chaotic 6v6 game, a trap-based hero like Penny Parker is actually going to see a lot more value than you'd expect, just because players aren't going to be moving with the type of discipline that's required to properly clear her out if you're crafty with how you engage. That's it for today's video. If you did enjoy it and want us to keep uploading Marvel Rivals content, please leave the video with a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.